So look, brother, we got a lot to talk about, and not a whole lot of time, and so I kind of want to jump in, but give the people an update. How are you doing? How's the new book project coming?
Uh, I'm sleeping. I'm starting to sleep rough again. Whenever people
Yeah,
ask me that question, usually that's a throwaway question. How you doing? I've
yeah,
started to ask people how they sleeping, brother. I've started to ask people how they eating, and I'm eating all right. My sleeping is a little off, especially since we're getting closer to the state getting ready to murder another person. Not this state, but the state in general,
mm,
on death row. So I'm it's a little shaky right now, man. And the book project is fine. It's going good. We're going through our second edits, but we're in a we're in a particularly thick energy right now with everything that's happening. People have a sense that there is a pregnancy, a possibility of things, and I think that's one of the things we're going to be talking about today is how do we begin to sense into these things that we have historically ignored and
yes.
sense into different types of intelligences and energy. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
I, I'm
it's a little
pretty
rough right now.
sure. I'm pretty sure it did, brother. Thank
Okay.
you, and I
Okay.
appreciate you being open and honest. And I do think we asked too many throwaway questions, right? Like,
Mhm.
how are you really doing?
Yeah.
And so it's nice to know where your head is at
Hmm.
as we dive in.
Yeah.
So I just
Yeah.
want to say, the Minnesota Justice Research Center, our organization is focused on transforming the criminal legal system. We don't really believe we have a justice system. We have a system that does a really good job of protecting the profits and property of the wealthy, and then it
Hmm.
divides and controls the rest of us.
Hmm.
There's a racialized trauma, racialized history that the system has facilitated that hasn't
Hmm.
been dealt with.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons we hold this conference every year is because I believe that the moment that we're in is the charge that's been given us is to really reckon with the history of our systems and redesign and rebuild them. And I believe that that process, before you get to policy stuff, has to begin with the reimagining. And
Yes.
so I'm asking you to be here with us today to help us start that process of reimagining.
Hmm.
And I guess my first question for you is, if so in your book, you use this phrase that says that justice is how we love each other in public.
Hmm.
Um, so with that as your sort of working definition of justice,
Hmm.
help me and the people understand, why is it necessary for us to reimagine justice right now?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think if we've learned nothing, and that's a quote from a person, if we've learned nothing about the way that the system is structured right now, if we've learned nothing, we've learned that it is not equitable. We've
Mm-hmm.
learned that the foundation of this system, no matter how much piousness and virtue we want to give it, there's a feralness to it, right? As it relates to indigenous people, right? As it relates to indigenous people's children, as it relates to children, indigenous folks being their children being what's the old saying? Save the man, kill the Indian.
Mm-hmm.
That was a ethos within the whole structure that permeated the boarding schools, and so when I think about reimagining justice, it can't start with the frame of what white folks have put together already, right? Because that framing is feral at its root. And so when I think about reimagining justice, for me, it really is about how much time are we going to give to creating a living, embodied, anti racist structure, a living embodied anti-racist justice, right? Something that a creation of a structure that leans to how much time are we going to give the exploration of justice as opposed to just coming up with strategies and getting funding from the giving community and you know what I mean, that
Yeah.
this whole thing has to be reimagined with earnest, reimagining with the idea that what we're going to do is not just do strategy, but we're actually going to create a culture. There is no living embodied anti-racist culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is none. There is no justice culture, right? We have to actually build culture, not just talk about what are the strategies we're going to employ in order to get this funding from such and such and such and such. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, I know this is uncomfortable to hear, right? I know it's uncomfortable for people to hear this, but if you keep trying to do it the same way you've been doing it, you're going to keep getting what you got. This system, this justice system is structured on white comfort, right?
Mm-hmm.
White comfort trumps Black liberation. White comfort trumps indigenous justice. White comfort trumps everything, right? And if we don't acknowledge that and work with that, we'll keep getting what we got. We'll keep getting white people and white folks and people who believe in this structure tweaking around the edges and not making foundational changes. This is a foundational problem, not a tweaking problem.
And I wholeheartedly agree. I think we spend a lot of time in the margins around criminal justice reform,
Yep.
and we try to tweak things to get a little bit better. And then when you get back to the neighborhood, folks are like, y'all passed all these policies at the Capitol, but I don't feel the impact,
That's
right?
right.
And
That's
that's
right.
because at some point you actually got to look at and examine foundations,
Right.
right?
Right.
So tell me this.
Well,
So like,
and
yep,
one of the reasons why when we come back and the community is like what y'all really doing?
yeah,
What's really going on? One of the reasons why that is that most of the time we don't include those people in the process. So there's
no,
no investment. There's no communal investment, right? We believe that we can come up with so I'm just gonna say this. White folks,
say
white
it.
folks' niceness and kindness is inadequate to deal with the brutality that this system wreaks on Black and indigenous and bodies of culture every day. Your niceness is inadequate. Your kindness is inadequate. Your pearl clutching is inadequate. So now what? Are you going to keep doing the inadequate pieces, or are you going to actually slow down long enough to build culture so you can deal with the charge, with the 400-year charge of this thing that we call white body supremacy and race? If you're not going to do that, then you're just kind of moving the chairs around on the Titanic.
Yeah. So I was going to ask this question later, but since you brought up the Titanic, the, talk about reckoning. Talk about what it means to have a reckoning, because in your book you spend a whole chapter on this, and you kind of just alluded to it now, and I know the new book that there's probably some themes in there about reckoning, and I
Yeah,
because if the kindness is not adequate, right?
yeah,
Which we live in Minnesota, right? Like
you're right,
people take like that's a hard thing for people to hear,
right.
and if that is inadequate, tell me what is required to have a reckoning and why we need to have a
Yeah,
reckoning.
yeah. So reckoning means that you confront something that you have not been willing to confront, and you reckon with it. What does reckoning mean? It means to deal with it. It means to work with it. It means to work with the ugliness of it. It means to work with the with what has not worked. It means looking really at how things are and beginning to map. It's what I call in the book, brother, clean pain and dirty pain.
Yes.
We've been
Yeah.
so willing to deal with the dirty pain. And what that means is going around things, not going through them, not going through them so you can be tempered and conditioned, right? So you can actually deal with what is going up, what's happening. Reckoning for me is cleaner. It's painful, but it's cleaner. And so for me, we've been in a reckoning kind of spiral for a while. And for me, January 6th was that kind of clarion call for a lot of white bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you can keep walking around here thinking that what you sense as this undergird of what's undergirding this kind of this virtuous understanding that we have, or this virtuous thing that we think about America. But January 6th laid bare to put to the ugliness that was there, right? And what we've decided to do with that, the same thing we did with Sandy Hook, right? The same thing we did with Tamir Rice, the same thing we did with Brother Floyd. When you get a chance to actually lean towards something that's more just and justice,
Yeah.
white bodies more often than not will choose comfort, right? We had a chance to change just in Minneapolis. We had a chance to literally change the structure of something, right? We had a chance to actually say, do we want to include in our response to policing calls and police calls, do we really want to have just police officers who in some cases only have 2 years of working with of training, and not a full 2 years of training, but not working with necessarily bodies of culture? Do we want them responsible for making decisions around what happens to children? Do we want them responsible for making decisions around mental health? And all of the good liberal white folks in Minneapolis decided, no, we don't want to do that. That's not something we're interested in. Even though we had George Floyd's picture on our Instagram for a month, now it's done returned and we got pictures of our food and our cat again. So this is when I talk about reckoning. The more you ignore the energy that is pregnant, that's pushing us to change and transform and do something, the more you ignore it, the more energy builds up behind the dam. And so when I'm talking about reckoning, I'm not just talking about something happening. I'm talking about being able to sense in that things are happening, even if we can't see it right now, things are moving. And to ignore it means that you're literally building more energy up behind the dam. And when it busts again, and it will, because what we know is that America will kill another Black man. It will kill another trans woman. It will kill another, it will disappear Indigenous women. We know that's going to happen, right? When it does, don't clutch your pearls and act like you didn't do anything. You voted for change not to occur because your comfort was more important than real justice.
So I really, let's camp out here just for another minute. So this idea of reckoning is about facing the harm, right, and that the system has facilitated.
And continues to facilitate.
And continues to facilitate and will facilitate, right? Until it is disrupted.
That's right.
And what I've been trying to, now you used to do a lot of training like procedural justice with MPD.
Yes.
And I spend a lot of time with officers these days. Like, I have meetings with officers on the North Side and working on the post board and whatnot. What I have struggled to figure out is that we continue to define, even with you were alluding to the Vote Yes campaign, right? Mm-hmm. And we continue to define like police brutality as like a Black people's problem, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. As if we could solve it, as right, if we started it, as if the system of policing wasn't built, from the legacy of slave patrols and other things, right?
Right.
But it's seen as a Black person's problem when it really is a policing problem.
Right.
And what I appreciate about your book is that you actually don't just focus on Black and white, but you add this third category of police. Mm-hmm. Police mm-hmm. bodies and what mm-hmm. trauma police bodies are experiencing. Mm-hmm. Talk about you lay it out, like your vision for policing. And since you just kind of spoke up the amendment, talk about your vision for policing?
Yeah. So right now, in the book, I talk about, and I lay it out pretty clearly, that the current structure that we have is not a community or communal policing structure, right? It is a feral policing structure. It is built on feralness as it relates to Black and brown and bodies of culture, right? And if you just, people have a tendency to imbue vocation with virtue, right? So they imbue the vocation of police and policing with virtue. And what we know is that virtue is emergent. Virtue emerges up out of you. It is not something just because you put on a uniform that you get imbued with, right? And so when I'm talking about what I think about policing, I think
Mm-hmm.
that the kind of lip service that we give policing is that thing that I was talking about earlier in terms of nice and kindness, right? We think, well, it's just a few bad apples, right? Now, when you say that, that is a positioning that you're taking in terms of it. Not only says that what I believe in, but it also says that my positioning of history is that we are not going to look at the ugliness of how this thing was created. What we're going to do is look at right now, where we're at right now. And right now, where we're at right now is that we believe that there's only a few bad apples. But the reality is that when you're talking about communal policing, that means that those police officers. So let me just say. So I said this to you earlier, right?
Yeah.
I said yesterday. I said to you. I said that when I'm working with police departments, if you don't have at least 10% of the police officers and the brass willing to go through at least a year of embodied training, not just training, but an embodied process by which they are developing a alternate container within that organization, that those people are going to be doing work together and learning from each other and doing embodied practices around race specifically. If you don't have at least 10% of the vertical and horizontal going through that, then what you're basically doing is doing performance. You have to establish within some of these places a different culture that can withstand the charge of the feral culture when you start to make changes. But more often than not, people just come up with an idea and they say, well, here's what we're going to implement. But no culture that's being developed, no language change, no vibratory change, no meaning making change, nothing. And they move out on it. So after a year, they break apart because they cannot tolerate the charge of race. So when I'm thinking about what I believe needs to happen, most organizations, most policing organizations don't even give a shit about police officers. They don't care that police officers are secondarily traumatized, right? They don't care that police officers are vicariously traumatized, right? And so by the time 5 to 7 years, they worked the overnight shift for 5 to 7 years and saw and smelled and saw and their bodies wanted to override those things. By the time they get to that 7th year, they hate everybody. It's why they eat their guns. It's why they end up getting divorced. It's why their children can't stand them, right? It's why people think that they're assholes even when they don't have the uniform on. Why? It's because the structure does not give a shit about the slave catcher, right? But the slave catcher cares about it because they have a role. That role has been imbued with virtue, therefore they can't see it. So for me, that's why I talk about the reckoning, is that either the organizations are going to begin to slow down to be able to examine this feralness.
Yes.
Not from like a distance, but right up in it, close to it, examine it unflinchingly, and then begin to figure out how you develop a container that can work with that charge so you can use that fuel to transform the system and not just come up with a strategy.
Yeah, I think what you're saying really resonates with me because I've been trying to figure out. So, I talk to officers who are on the front lines, who see some of the worst things in the community, who are there in real time when violence is happening in our community.
Yep.
And I try to say, well, you're not going to be able to police your way out of that problem. Why not advocate for policies and things that will bring resources in the community? Why not do more of the things that people like, Charlie Adams does, where they're volunteering at the football team and all of that. And it's funny that, like, you know, or why not live in the communities where you police, or at least live in the city where you police, even if you police on the other side. Like, all these things are things that I feel like would bring community and law enforcement closer. And it's just like I get met with blank stares,
Yeah,
right?
because
And
there's no structure, there is no container to hold this thing that you hold communal, that you call communal policing. There is no structure to hold it. There's nothing
but
to
there,
hold it.
but let me say this though, because there are structures like that in other communities where the
Okay,
police do operate that way.
okay.
And
What did
I
right,
yeah.
right. But the question, you can't just start there and say, well, why can't we duplicate that here? Well, you can't duplicate that here because I would argue that those communities where that is occurring, shit had to get so bad and so raw that there was no alternative but to begin to move in that direction. I would argue that what you see is, why can't we just duplicate it? Why can't this be scalable? Scalability means that people had to slow down enough to see that their investment in the federal system had to be let go of in order to grab on to the communal system. And that
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't have any container that can hold that, when the release of this starts to happen and a grabbing of that start to happen, people will go back to the feralness, because that is what we are in. That's what we've ingested. That's what we've been imbued with. That's what's in the very soil of this thing.
So I appreciate you so much, brother. Like, I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I hope as we get to the end of the conversation that you'd be willing to lead us through a practice. Um, because one of the things I really appreciate about my grandmother's hands is not just the rememberings, because I'm somebody who appreciates a good summary at the end of a chapter, but also the exercises. So I have a practice that I do every morning,
Yep.
and the fact that, you know, I was able to add to my practice of
Mm-hmm.
getting grounded
Mm-hmm.
through the book. And if people read the book or listen to the book, that's fine. But I always tell people, like, do the practices,
Yeah, the practices are the
do the
most important thing.
practices.
Yeah, the practices are the most important thing in the book, right? This system is structured. One of the primary pieces that this system is structured on is urgency,
Hmm.
right? Urgency and stuckness at the same time. That is the kind of textual thing that people are experiencing, right? Is that I want to do something, but I'm stuck, right?
Hmm.
That's part of the structural pieces. That's not just a personal piece. That's also structural. And so one of the practices in the book are really to get at and play with this and understand this sense of urgency. And then how do you begin to get enough practice and enough reps in to begin to begin to notice when that urgency settles, or if it settles, or if there's more room that opens up over time. And so the practices really are about, as I said earlier, conditioning and tempering the body to be able to even hold. So we want more justice, right?
Hmm.
But we don't really have a system that can actually hold justice. Think about what I'm saying.
Hmm.
We have it. How it's I used to work for a domestic violence treatment organization, Harriet Tubman Center, for 15 years, right?
Yeah, I
And
think
you would
there I
have,
think there are EDs on the call right now. So.
yeah. If Jen is on here, good to see you, Jen. So one of the things that happens when people come in domestic violence is that if you spend any amount of time in the shelters, one of the things that you realize is that when people come in, they bring their whole selves, right? And when people are brutalized, they don't just learn and get impacted by the victim pieces. They also understand the perpetrator pieces. They
Hmm.
also understand because they've been impacted by that. So they don't just understand the nuance of being victimized. They also understand the nuance of perpetration. And so one of the things that happens is that if you don't have that understanding, you will end up being put in the situation to where you think your job is to rescue. Your job is to is to save people, when really your job is to create a condition and a container so those processes that need to be worked through can be worked through, so people can actually begin to recognize joy. Most of the
Mm-hmm.
time why people stay in those situations is not because they're crazy. Most of the time the reason why people stay in those situations is because they're more intimate with the victimization pieces, they're more intimate with the perpetrator pieces than they are with the healing pieces. The same thing is true when we're talking about policing. We think that all you got to do is let police know the right thing to do and they'll do the right thing. What we miss is that they don't have a rubric for what justice really is. Their idea of justice has been given to them by a feral system, right? So my idea of justice is making sure that those black bodies stay in line, that people treat me with respect, that people hold me in reverence. That's not justice. It is the justice that you've been spoon fed, but it is not the justice that people are literally looking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm talking about these pieces of practices, I'm saying that has to be tempered and conditioned. If I want to learn, if I want to learn how to be a better basketball player, I can't just use the same strategy that I've been using, right? If Jordan wouldn't have done what he needed to do, he never would have gotten past the Detroit Pistons, right? He'd have been a wonderful basketball player
He
with no rings.
he technically never did get past the Detroit Pistons.
Well,
He,
we could
he,
we
he
we
had to
could
go.
argue.
He had to play the Cavs to get to the finals. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I know,
um,
but eventually he figured out a way to get to where he needed to get to, and
yeah.
it wasn't going to be him doing the same things that he was doing. And so for me, you go argue with me about the,
The
I get it. I hear you. We could debate that. I would say that the work that he had to do after games and before games and the weight training and all that stuff helped him get to where he needed to get to.
Yes, absolutely. I think you bring up a couple points, and I have a lot of thoughts I want to make sure we cover. But sticking with this though, and this concept of justice, like after the and healing, right? After the uprising, you and I were given the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Brittany Lewis and
Yes.
Angela Davis for a Call to Mind episode. And I gotta be honest, I don't know that I've ever processed being a black man and the pain that it comes with when your city's on fire and publicly before. That was an experience. And
Yeah.
I think they just dropped a link to that
Yeah.
in the chat for people to go and check out. Um, and it's just this you continue to push this concept, and I think like you can be a little hard on white folks. It feels like like clutch, using phrases like clutch pearls and stuff. You can be a little
Wait,
hard
wait, wait. Hold on,
on
hold on, hold on. Hold on.
yeah,
I gotta say,
yeah. I know I'm
no,
messing with
no,
you. Yep.
no, no, no. So let me just say
Yeah.
this. So this is the tempering and conditioning piece that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
If white people hear me say clutch pearls, means that they're going to opt out of creating a living embodied anti-racist culture and lean towards justice. If that's what's going to stop them from picking up the book and possibly leaning into that and doing the practices, then they weren't in the fight. No way. I don't
Mm-hmm.
get to opt out. So I'm not. Hard is being is waiting for a governor to decide whether or not you're going to live or die when the evidence suggests that you might not have done something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hard is having your indigenous babies being disappeared, your indigenous female babies being disappeared, but a white woman who gets missing is blasted all over the news. Not saying that white women should, if they're missing and hurt, shouldn't be taken care of, but I want the same thing for my indigenous brothers and sisters. I want that same thing for my trans brothers and sisters. I want the same thing for my black brothers and sisters. Okay, and the bodies of culture. I want the same amount of attention. Right. So I'm not being hard. What I am being is probably some white folks and white bodies are uncomfortable. That's not the same thing as being hard. Uncomfortableness is something that, like I said, white comfort is structural. And
Yeah.
so not so I just
Well,
had
well, and I don't want to create a space where we have to caretake white folks. I think that
yeah.
the what I am trying to say though, Resma, is that um, the solution for so you talk about white body supremacy, you talk about black bodies, and you talk about police bodies.
Hmm.
And what I love about how you frame this and structure this conversation is that the solution is the same for all of us.
Yeah.
The
Well,
solution
yeah.
is the same for all of us, and
Yeah.
that justice is a concept for all of us.
Yeah.
And what we
Yeah.
have right now
Right.
is disconnect from our own
Right.
from the ability and to from the tools we need to help calm ourselves, self-soothe, the five anchors.
Right. That's right.
Those tools are for everyone,
Right. Right.
including black folks. And
Exactly.
so I don't want people to I don't want people I mean I do think it's wise to yeah, I think I've made my point. So my question is if the solution is the same for all of us in our humanity and that we're trying to lean towards justice, at the MNJRC, I'm learning about the four types of justice. This
Mm-hmm.
idea of procedural justice, where we want processes to be fair, distributive justice, where we want to distribute resources equitably, right?
Mm-hmm.
Punitive justice, or I think like Daniel Sered, who we'll hear from in the conference later, would talk about accountability, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then restorative justice, which currently always feels like an add-on, oh, we'll try restorative justice, but can you really have punitive measures in the system without restorative justice? Does
Mm-hmm.
not including a full-bodied, full-throated restorative justice process attached to a justice system that covers all four types of
Mm-hmm.
justice and not just punitive.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do that without restorative justice? Can you punish people and not have a robust restorative process that brings people that reconciles folks?
Mm-hmm.
Or can you leave people broken and get something
Mm-hmm.
different in
Mm-hmm.
society? I think,
Mm-hmm.
these are the things that I'm struggling with and
Yeah.
wrestling with.
So one of the things that one of our ancestors said, Frederick Douglass, he said, it is easier to build, to build joyous, good children than it is to fix a broken person, right? And this whole, talk about justice and policing really is, if you listen really closely, if you listen to what the vibe is let's just fix the broken people, not let's stop breaking people, not let's stop breaking people, let's just fix it, let's tweak these pieces. And so for me, the idea, so yeah, there are practices in the book where I talk about the, that there are similarities to things that we need to do. I don't talk about it in terms of tools though. I talk about it in terms of toys. I talk about it in terms of how do we begin to play with things. So what needs to emerge, one of the reasons why we have to address these pieces around injustice is because injustice is a thwarting, it has a thwarting, it thwarts what's possible, right? We have to deal with that so it can be loosened some, so what could emerge can actually have enough room to emerge. Right now, there is no room for emergence to take place. There is no room for ge- things being generative to take place, right? So even in when we talk about restorative justice, it's usually pushed through a lens of put up against punitive justice, right? So we have
Hmm.
them butted up against each other, and not how do we understand this piece around restorative pieces as its own unique piece, um, and how can that be used in a how can we nurture that piece without saying, okay, this is an alternative to the justice pieces, or to the punitive pieces, right? Because the moment that you make it an alternative, you're pushing it through the lens of what we have, this feral structure right now. So for me,
Hmm.
the practices, this is why I keep coming back to this, bro. Beginning to develop a culture that can hold the beauty in what you're trying to say. You're trying to say we need a better way of pushing through the restorative justice right now, right? We have to rethink this idea, right? Right now, it leans too heavily on punitive, right? And what I would say is there is no room for that. That's why you're beating your head up against the wall, right? That's why it feels like good people are blocking you, right? It's because you and nobody's created a container for the possibility of it, right?
So we're recording this conversation today for the conference, but we are also going to use it for our podcast that we're going to launch I believe in January. And the podcast is really about sort of what I'm looking for is a theory of transformation by talking to folks like yourself and others, right, in the community. A theory of transformation around how we transform the justice system. You keep talking about creating a container. You keep talking about creating culture.
Right.
And I know that the somatic practices is part of doing that work. How do we transform our justice system? Like how do we create that culture? How do we create that container?
So can I work?
Absolutely.
Can we do something for a second?
Yeah.
So without getting into detail, you told me something, and I'm not going to share the story, but you told me something about somebody that you love and an experience that you had with
about my mother.
Yeah, that was trying to help them, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that when that person turned to you and said, "This is what I'm doing. This is where we're trying to go. Here's what I've talked to your mom about. Here's the context that we're doing this in," right? It made all the difference to you in terms of how you were able to now, at the beginning, when you're watching this person do this with your mother, this person that you love, right? And your mother is saying, this is painful, right? This particular piece is painful. And then that person says these things to you and says, I'm going to be here working with her. I know it looks painful, but let me tell you what I'm doing, right? That made all the difference for you. It shifted not only your understanding, it shifted what you had available. So now not only could that person be doing the work, but you could also be helping along, pushing a different possibility forward. So when you're talking to your mother and your mother's complaining, I ain't going back, I'm not doing that, you say, Ma, here's what's going on. I know, but I'm here with you. I love you. We're going to do this together. Here's what's happening, right? So that same thing, brother, that you did naturally, tied to creation, naturally with your mother, is the same thing that is not taking place when we're having restorative justice conversations. Same thing that's not taking place when we're having conversations about what policing should look like. That's slowing down enough so that urgency can be looked at, so that the avoidance of pain can be worked with, so that charge can be held. So when I'm talking about building a community or building a culture in a container, that's what I'm talking about. Slowing it down enough so that process that you went through with your mother, right, could happen. That's generative. That's emergent. That's what I'm saying, bro.
So to let people in on the inside, so my mom had a stroke a few months ago, and when I went to last weekend when I was in Texas taking care of her, the occupational therapist was rubbing ice packs on her arm. She lost all the feeling in her arm and left leg, and she explained to me that my mom was feeling pain from what should just feel like cold, and that she had to retrain her brain after a stroke to understand the sensation of cold. But Resmaa, your point is so so I don't think I told you this part of the story, is that after that conversation, after talking to my mom about clean pain and dirty pain, you as sort of like a trying to get her to adopt a some sort of framework to like encourage her to get through those exercises. She started walking the next day, and you like in real time, just helping someone reprogram their brain to be able to feel sensation. And we took her out on a walk. We were there. We spent time with her. And the next day, she got the feel. She said she woke up and she could feel the covers on her leg for the first time. And I'm not saying that like we solved my mom's stroke recovery. No. But giving her the space in her mind to allow for a new possibility. And her body. Yes.
So
yes.
Here's what you just hit on, brother, is that the context, as the context changed, she was actually able to experience nuance in ways that she didn't even know was possible.
Yes.
That's when I'm hearing you talk, brother, that's what I'm saying. There is no container that's built that can hold these pieces, that we need to look at and develop nuance around it. That's what you did, and that's what the occupational therapist did, is that they helped your mother understand, yes, there might be pain, but there is also other things too. There's nuance. There is something as you do this, Ma. There are things that are going to emerge that on the front part you can't see, and I'm here with you. That piece, that ethos that you just said, brother, does not exist in the justice system, and we must slow down enough. White bodies have to slow down and work with white bodies. Black bodies and bodies of culture have to slow down and work with, not together, because the charge is so vicious, and 400 years has not been looked at, that the black body and the indigenous body is where America does its dirt. It's where it always pushes its dirt. And so if you don't slow it down and begin to do that work, police bodies should be doing it with police bodies first.
Mm-hmm.
Not with me. Not with me. Because you will brutalize me, because that's the positioning. Do that work with other police bodies first. Get intimate with other police bodies first. Don't come over here first. And you should be held accountable for everything that you do, right? By the people. And if you're going to transform, you're going to have to begin to get at the ugly gunk that you're unwilling to get with. So what you did was helped your mother develop an understanding that had more room available to her than just the only thing that I'm experiencing is pain. And what that therapist knew is, yes, you are experiencing pain, absolutely, but there's other things on that spectrum.
It was clean pain. It was helping
clean.
her.
It was cleaner.
Helping her recover.
Still pain.
And I think, like, as we start to wrap up this conversation, I'm somebody just remembering during the uprising, sitting at home with my family and watching the 3rd Precinct burn, knowing that the 3rd Precinct officers had assaulted friends of mine and, contributed to pain that I experienced growing up, and watching that building burn, but then also knowing that friends of mine who worked at the 3rd Precinct were out that night dealing with the chaos. And it's crazy to me that, we continue to try to polarize these things instead of humanize them.
Yeah.
And that the Black community can't fix policing.
Yeah.
It's just not, that's not the way.
Job.
It's not our job. It's not, we didn't start the fire, right? Like the reality is that police have to fix policing.
Yeah.
And I'm struck by I was in Rochester talking with the chief of police, who told me that 84% of their calls come from the Black community. Mm-hmm. And then they talk about, well, why, racial disparities. And I'm like, well, pause all of that knee-jerk reaction.
Exactly.
Pause.
Exactly. Pause.
If 84% of your calls come from the Black community, what kind of relationship do you have from your number one customer? Law enforcement is a fee for service.
Pause. Pause. Right there.
Like, what is the relationship? What do you want it to be? how are you not our biggest allies? If
Right.
84% of your calls are coming from our community,
Right.
and I don't understand I try to humanize, we need to humanize everyone in this experience.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure people create space to heal, to deal with clean pain, but
Right.
we can't fix their problem. They got to fix it themselves,
So
you know?
so listen to this. So the person, the chief saying that to you, before, as he says that to you, there is so here's the nuance, right? Here's the
Yeah.
embodied pieces. As he's saying that to you, what's the vibe? Even so, his words are one thing. 84% of our calls come from the Black community. But that's what he's saying verbally. What is the vibration that you're picking up on when he says that?
So we only got a couple minutes here to camp on this, but you know what the vibration is.
Come
And
on.
this is not a critique of the chief of police,
Right,
but
right.
the reality is that when white folks or police folks say things like that, we
Right.
know what they mean is these humans don't know how to act.
That's right.
And we
That's
have to
right.
come and control them, and we
That's
have
right.
to come
That's right.
and
That's
we
right.
have to show, and that's the problem. You know?
So the reason why I asked you that is that that piece never gets dealt with.
Right.
That piece, that vibratory piece right there, that does not get researched. It does not get, there is no way to work with the charge of that. It doesn't get questioned. It is just, that's the pharaohness that I'm talking about. That's the pharaohness. And so, brother, the piece that you're talking about is Resmaa, how do we begin to build a container? We begin to build a container by beginning to surface that shit, by beginning to work with that shit right there. Before you move on any further, work with that. Did that make sense?
I don't know if I froze or you froze, but somebody froze.
Somebody froze. So let me just say it again. So that piece, that energy right there, that is present in your face. He's saying one thing, but the vibratory text of it, the charge of that text of it never gets questioned. We have to begin to question that. That's how we start to build a container.
Okay.
All right, cool.
So I see some comments and questions in the chat. So I'm just going to read through some of these real quick, Resmaa. So Jamila, I think Jamila kind of kicked it off. From a psychological standpoint, what motivations do white-bodied individuals have to leave comfort and reckon with white supremacy? Great question.
Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
You gotta do bumper sticker here because we're running out of time though.
So
but run it down.
Sticker, yeah, you better tell me bumper sticker. So I don't even need to say it. Jamila already said it. That the very policing structure, there has been no time where white supremacy and policing have not been intertwined. And so white people don't want to acknowledge that. They want to say, well, we want to start from today. No, the seeds of white body supremacy is the protection of white bodies, right? The comfort of white bodies is supreme when it comes to Black and indigenous bodies. That police officer or that chief that you were talking to that said that statement to you is actually acknowledging that when he says 84% in the subtext is these ends can't get it together, so we got to control them. That's directly out of slave catcher mentality. That's directly out of plantation ethics. But we don't want to deal with that. We just say we don't have to deal with that. Let's deal with what's right now, facts. Okay.
Yeah. I'm looking in the chat here, and there's a lot of comments. I'm not sure I see a lot of questions. It looks like people are really doing a good job of connecting and processing it. So let's do this with our last couple moments. I encourage everybody to read the chat and engage there, stay online. With our last couple moments here, I just want to give you time and space to kind of close us out with an activity, if you'd be willing. Is that okay?
It's a quick one. It's a quick
A
one.
quick one. Yeah.
So,
Go
so
ahead.
one of the things in the book that I talk about the 4 cultural somatic practices, right? Self and communal orientation, self and communal grounding, self and communal movement, and self and communal touch. When I was working with I have when I was doing my private practice, and I would police officers would be coming to see me, and I worked with a lot of police officers and a lot of military. And one of the first things that I had them doing when I would be working with them is understanding grounding and orientation first, right? Why? Because most police officers, if they've been around any time, when they start to hit the street, they don't realize that they become disoriented. And disorientation is infused in the very structure of policing, right? So as a human being, if all you're working are overnight shifts for 5 to 7 years, most rookies work overnight shifts, work the late shifts, right? Because the gravy shifts, the first shifts is right, all that different type of stuff where you could spend time with human beings that are doing things, or walking their dogs and waving and doing all of those things. You don't see that because you're working 5 to 7, right? So one of the first you're working the overnight shift. So one of the first things that I tell police officers that you are disoriented. You are oriented towards the difficulties and not oriented towards anything that's joyous. Everything is constricted in your body. So that is also true for us, right? So one of the first things that I tell people is when you get on shift or when you are walking around, first thing you need to do, and specifically right now for Black bodies, one of the first things that you need to do specifically for indigenous bodies is that you need to look around and particularly find the windows and the exits. Why? Because you have been oriented to a place that says there's no windows, there's no exits. So if the only way to get out of this situation is through you, I'm going through you, right? Even if you say, even if I ask you to hand me your wallet, right? And in my mind, that looks like a gun in your black hand, I'm blasting you, right? That's because for 5 to 7 years, I've been conditioned around a certain thing, and I come from a society that's conditioned around the Black body and the indigenous body being dangerous off top, right? So one of the first things I tell people to do is orient. Look for the windows and the exits first. Second piece is look behind you. Even though you know that there's nothing behind you, here your body may be reacting because of the things that you have been conditioned around, both historically, intergenerationally, persistent institutionally, and personally. You don't even know that the energy of urgency and the energy of survival and the energy of stuckness is in you. So beginning to do reps by just orienting to the environment and noticing if there's any settling, or if it still has all of that charge and energy to it. You have to get the reps in over and over and over again before, just like with your mom, before the reframing, before the context, your mom could not understand the nuance between cold and pain. Once you helped her develop the context, she was able to understand the nuance. She knew what to look for. Orienting helps your body know what to look for in terms of resource, in terms of joy, in terms of settling, in terms of just being present. But if you haven't conditioned that both within your body and within the structure, it cannot recognize it. It has no use for it, and it will push it to the side. So that's what I would say is orient, look around.
Find the windows,
Find
find
the
the
windows and the
exits,
exits.
look behind you.
Look behind you.
Yes, yes. There's one last question. I know we're over on time. James Burrows says, what role do Black
What
leaders
up,
play in
James?
this work? So I'll give you, if you got a bumper sticker
What
response
did he
to
say?
James,
Say the question.
what role do Black leaders play in this work? It's a
Well,
perfect James Burrows
yeah,
question.
yeah. Here's the role that Black leaders play: is creating a soft place for the next 10 years for our people to come and know that they're not crazy. Creating a place where we can just come and be with each other, to know that we're not defective. Creating places for our people to come, to not to contend with the urgency that has been in, that we've ingested, and contend with the brutality that we've ingested, and that we then spew on each other, right? That creating places so we can actually cultivate the joy that is within us, that's looking for a place to emerge. Black leaders have to, but that means that Black leaders need to do it first. Right. That means that we have to cultivate it in ourselves first, that we have to be willing to stick with each other for the next 10 years so something can emerge between us. Many of us don't like each other. Many of us don't like ourselves.
We
Many
don't
of
got
us are
time to
looking
get
what
into
color,
that
but
one.
I'm just saying that we have to begin to slow it down so we
Yeah.
can work with those pieces, so we can provide the room. If the room doesn't exist in us, we can't provide the room for our people.
Yeah. Well, Resmaa, it has been a blessing. I haven't actually gotten my like it's time to sign off yet. So send me a.
Y'all.
I'm gonna keep going if y'all don't send me a time check. I'm just trying to be obedient. Okay, Justin, we got our wrap. Thank you,
Okay.
Sophia. Resmaa, let me just say that it is a blessing to be in space with you, to have this conversation. Your book, New York Times bestseller. I'm so thankful that you're having this success. I look forward to the Quaking of America, the new book. You've been a mentor to me, an encouragement to me, a founding voice of reason that convinced me to serve my community years ago.
Yeah.
And it is a privilege and an honor to be in the struggle with you, brother. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, brother. You make me so proud. Check out resmaa.com, resmaa.com, if you want to take classes or workshops and stuff like that. Proud of you, brother. Keep doing what you're doing. Love you, man.